Hi, my name is Nicole Howell. I'm 25 years old and I'm a student in HSER 508, Studies in Interpersonal Communication. Go on to the next slide. My overarching goal for interpersonal communication is to be able to identify my own weaknesses and strengths, to seek God's heart for other people, to improve the way that I deliver my messages, to serve others by listening to them, to live a life of openness, and to have patience, both with myself and with other people. If you go on to the next slide, I'll here talk about enlarging my conversation. The way that I would like to pursue enlarging my conversation is to be able to put equal value on every discussion that I have with other people. I also want to be able to listen with an open heart and an open mind. And I want to be intentional about eliminating noise, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on. Please go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you about behavioral blend. Mars Carbonell came up with this theory to categorize different personality types. There's about 4 different categories of personality types. I took a test on uniquelyu.com, and the results said that I am a CIS personality type. And basically it means that I thrive in environments where I can inspire and encourage people. I'm a people person. I really try to maintain unity and prevent conflict, and I always put relationships before tasks. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you about my interpersonal skills. I took the interpersonal skills test. This assessment told me that I have good communication skills, that I have excellent listening skills, that I have an ability to communicate clearly with other people, that I'm very insightful, comfortable dealing with emotions, and that I don't have any interpersonal limitations. That's what the assessment said, but after going through this course and paying more attention in different conversations, I've found that there's definitely many areas where I can grow. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll tell you some of the barriers that I have found. There was an article that I found by Rowe and his colleagues, and they said that communication noise refers to influences on effective communication that influence the interpretation of conversations. This is oftentimes overlooked, and communication noise can have a profound impact both on our perception of interactions with others and our analysis of our communication proficiency. Go on to the next slide. False perceptions. For example, the way that we perceive an individual, an object, or a topic. Another barrier could be hearing what I want instead of listening to what is actually being communicated. This can also happen when we have personal biases connected to what is being discussed. For example, we might put up a block and stop listening to someone because we had a bad past experience with them. Or we might simply decide that the topic of the conversation is just boring or unimportant. Go on to the next slide. According to Burley Allen, we each have our own meanings for words because we filter them through varied beliefs, knowledge, education, upbringing, and experience. Something that we have to remember that Burley Allen stated is that a word is simply a representation of the thing that it names or describes. It is not the thing itself, and may mean something different to the talker than it does to the listener. Go on to the next slide. Another barrier is the flat brain syndrome, and Peterson describes this in his text as when all of our systems go out of whack. Our heart emotions, what our head wants to say, and what our gut is telling us. And so that's a barrier to communication because when someone is flat-brained, as described by Peterson, they aren't in a place where they can communicate clearly or process clearly. If we go on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about some solutions to these problems. One major thing that Stewart points out in his book, Bridges Not Walls, is learning how to inhale and exhale properly. Inhaling is something that in normal life, when we breathe, it just happens naturally. We don't really have to think about it. There's also ways that we inhale when we're communicating that we might not recognize. For instance, certain perceptions that we have of other people. We might be categorizing someone and judging them, putting labels on them without even realizing it. This can cause a lot of problems in communication. So in order to inhale properly is to be able to listen and to perceive others without judgment and instead with an open mind. Exhaling is giving out. So this is how we express ourselves, and it can be through nonverbals, like the way that we look at someone when we talk to them. It could be our body movement. It could be also exhaling it's just any way that we give out and express ourselves. So it can be through talking as well. And just sharing our thoughts and feelings. If we can remain open as we inhale to allow only the truth about someone to come in, it will really help us to exhale in an appropriate and positive fashion. Go on to the next slide. Another way that we can do this is by remembering not to blame people. Like I said before, meanings come from the heart. They come from people's experiences and what they know and how they see the world. And so a lot of times we want to blame others for how they're acting or for what they have said, when instead of putting it on the person, we should just look at the heart. If we are able to look at instead inside the heart of someone, then we can listen to them empathetically. We can put ourselves in their shoes, and that's going to help us to be able to make meaning together with them instead of being against them. Go on to the next slide. Something that I learned throughout this course that has helped me so much in my communication and that I want to continue to do is to remember that each person is created with the same value. That's something that God talks about in the Bible, that He created each one of us in His image. And that means that there's something beautiful in each person. And if I can believe that every single person has the same value and worth and who is created with a purpose, then it's going to help me to listen to them, to pay attention when they're talking, and not to try to put all my views and beliefs on them. Go on to the next slide. The last solution that has been big for me is the talker-listener card, which I found to be very helpful from Peterson's textbook. Here it is, the talker-listener card. Please go on to the next slide and you'll see my action plan. Asking God for His perspective means going into each conversation and asking, Lord, how do you see this person? And what is the truth that I can convey in this conversation, this interaction? Also, one of my goals is to go into each conversation having an open mind. And that means to close my eyes and not judge a person by what I see on the outside, not by where they come from, what kind of upbringing they have had, the way that they talk, the way that they sound when they speak. Also, a part of my action plan is not to try to talk to people when they are flat-brained, and also not trying to have a conversation when I myself am feeling like my emotions are all out of whack. The next step in my action plan is to be patient. And that means remembering, like Stuart said, that it is possible to learn how to give and get criticism gracefully, to manage conflict effectively, and to develop relationships smoothly, but not 100% of the time. So even though I've gone through this course, learned a lot, improved my communication, and have this action plan, I have to remember that all my relationships are not going to be perfect 100% of the time. The next step in my action plan is to practice with the talker-listener card. The next step in my action plan is to have a learner's attitude, and then prepare to make meaning. I hope now that you feel more ready to go out and make meaning too. Thanks for joining me in my interpersonal communication presentation.